Hey everybody, we're Shyam and Chris, and this is Fan Team Radio.
And we are back. Well, I'm back because I'm joined by my very special guest, Sam. He's joined us before, but welcome back to the podcast.
Hello. I'm wearing a McLaren hat for those who can't see me, which
I
guess would
got
be
I got a
everybody.
McLaren hat in the back, so we're. I actually tried to buy the Formula One. Finally started coming out with the fitted hats that are my favorite, and McLaren has one. They sold out in like one day, and I couldn't get one. So I tried. I tried to support the team. They just don't let me. But
Now I want one.
well, if they ever go back in stock, we will get them. But yeah, the Hungarian Grand Prix was amazing, or at least I thought it was decent. I think F1 is officially back. We're in full drama mode. It was quite the race. Yeah, give me your overall thoughts. Did you enjoy it?
I really liked it. I thought it was very interesting because it was not full of too much on-track drama, but more, I guess, like quasi off-the-track drama or team radio drama. And it was really interesting to have a race that I was so on edge the entire time, but there wasn't a ton of passing really. Lots of attempted passes, but Hungary is called Monaco without the walls essentially for a reason.
Yep.
It's just generally very hard to pass. So it was interesting to see people get stuck behind in the same way, and it's very deceiving because you see, like the walls aren't so close to the track, and so you're like, oh, you could just like go to the left or to the right, but the actual track is very thin, especially with these cars of today being a lot bigger. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious if I know that their goal in the next few years is to shrink the cars a little bit, and I'm curious since I know you've been watching Formula One for a very long time, but I haven't, so I'm curious if once the cars get a little bit smaller, how that's going to change the dynamic of racing. But there is one place where people seem to pass Mr. Norris every time, which is in lap one, turn one. He's had 5 pole positions, and he's never kept. He's never held on to the lead of the race after the first turn. I believe either that or it's just the first lap. But curious what you thought about. Maybe what's wrong with Lando's. Is he just not good at starts, or is there just some nerves there? I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
He's clearly not doing that ball catching exercise enough.
Yeah.
So it's funny, and I'd really have to go back and like dig through the actual statistics of this, but I swear, at least in modern Formula One, like within the last 5 or so years, every person that has tried to start at like a more exaggerated angle towards the person on the left or the right to like cover someone off, they never, like, because they're so focused on going kind of more diagonal, it never seems to work out, and it always seems like the person in second place ends up getting them. And I feel like at least in the last 3 races or however many races, Lando has really angled his car so that he can cover off whoever's coming from behind, and it has never seemed to work. And I actually thought in this start he seemed to get a really good start, and at least it felt like to me, because he was just angled so much and so focused on getting ahead of Piastri or keeping Piastri behind him, it just kind of slowed him up, because I think he even, like, aside from starting at an angle, I think he kind of turned into Piastri a little bit. And I feel like if you just, like, you're always going to have people coming up the inside, especially in this track, because it's really like one of the only places that you can pass. I think it looked to me like he was too focused on that, and if he had just gone straight and maybe gotten better traction, it would have been all right. But who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the internet has kind of said that Lando seems to focus on the wrong person to defend on the starts, and maybe that was the case. Also, Lando's been good friends with Max for a long time, and Max has kind of had this habit of off the launch putting people onto the edge of the track and making them make a decision. But he's also much more experienced at the front of the grid, but also he's been in a rocket ship like the RB19 was basically unstoppable. So he's in a position to be quicker off the line, off the reaction time, and also keep the car in front. And he also has that reputation of not backing out. And I don't know if this is the case or not, but my thought process was that maybe Lando's like, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to bully people to the side, and I'm going to be that dominant, aggressive driver. And then he kind of backs out when and Max just never did. And so people would back out in response to Max to basically be like, well, it's not worth it. He's in a rocket ship. He's going to pass me anyways. Might as well, save my race and fight for a podium. But, you know, I, I like Lando a lot, and I want to see him to work on this part of his game, if it were. But just because I want to see him develop into that kind of WDC caliber level driver. But he definitely has a really good teammate to fight against. It's going to be one of those Lewis versus Nico things. I think in the long run, they're going to kind of fight and battle it out. And this race obviously made it a little bit more awkward for the future, because of what happened. I can't even remember what was the lap that they pit him on. Yeah, they pit on lap 45. They pit Norris 2 laps ahead of Piastri to cover off Hamilton, who was 10 plus seconds behind. Which I don't. Oh, you listened to were the Sky commentators talking about that? Because on the F1, they were commenting about this before it even happened, because they came over the team radio and say, well, we're going to cover off Hamilton here. And they're like, why would they do that? He's 10 seconds behind. They have plenty of time. Like, they can lose 5 seconds on an undercut and still not have an issue, still be 5 seconds ahead of Hamilton. And then they pit Lando anyways. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on just, did McLaren need to cover off Hamilton there? Did they make a huge mistake? And just curious on your thoughts overall on the whole Lando and team very awkwardness that happened over the radio over 20 laps or
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as Lando is concerned, I think he needs to, and you guys have made this point previously on a bunch of other episodes, and I know that in listening to other podcasts, other people have made this point, but it's not enough to have a really fast car, obviously, and be a good driver. Like, for Lando's sake, he really needs to either be a slightly less aggressive driver and just know that he has the pace to come back eventually, or he has to be kind of that Max Lewis of old, Michael Schumacher type that's like, this is just who I'm gonna be, and
right.
if you come close to me, like, I'll run your ass off the road. And I think he I just don't know if he has that disposition, so I think it might be that he just kind of learns to like pace himself, and if he is in that position again, maybe he like does back out, and then he, like, more strategically can get into a better position out of the next corner or something like that, because I just don't know, not that it will prevent him necessarily from winning as much, but I don't know that he has like that beast mode attitude of Max, where Max will basically just like sacrifice his car for a win. But and I think as far as McLaren goes as a team, similarly, they are doing very well, and they need to figure out how to be a winning team. They have a great car. They have, one of the best driver lineups on the grid, if not the best. But they don't, like, these strategy calls, the, they actually have pretty good pit stops. I would say more in terms of strategy. They really need to learn how to manage both their drivers and really kind of look in the mirror and figure out how to prioritize and win as a team. Because I think you it's similar when Ferrari was doing really really well. They didn't really prioritize Leclerc as much as they should have or could have, and not that he even would have won the championship because Max was so dominant anyways, but he could have benefited from so many more races and like been a lot closer. And I think McLaren needs to kind of shape up and realize that they're not an underdog team anymore, and they're a winning team fighting for podiums and wins. And so they like really need to have a kind of heart to heart with themselves to figure out how to like best manage that strategy and their drivers. Because even if I think in that situation, Oscar's in front by a a decent ish amount, and so he has priority for pit normally. And I think the only thing I can think of is they were nervous about Hamilton maybe doing the undercut, because the undercut is super strong in Hungary. And even though it was he was 8 or 10 seconds back, they probably thought that that may have been a lot closer than they would have liked. But they knew what they were doing, and they knew that giving Lando the priority they were so close, so they knew pretty much that he was going to undercut Piastri, especially after 2 laps, right? It wasn't even like bring Lando in and then bring Piastri in the lap after.
Right.
And so, I don't think there's anything like weird and nefarious going on, but I think they need better strategy. Like they really need to think through that stuff. And it felt very strange.
Completely agree. I mean, I was listening to the F1 guys, and they were talking to David Coulthard the whole time because he's part of their commenting team, and they brought up the situation where he had to do the same thing with letting Mika Häkkinen through for his first win, and the whole time these radio messages were going back and forth. David was like, "I'm very uncomfortable here because this is bringing back some old memories that I thought I had let go." Because, and he said somebody put him on the spot in the middle of the race and was just like, "Well, while we're here and we're talking about it, do you like that you did that, or would you do it again?" And he was like, "No, I wouldn't do it again if I could go back in time." He was like, F1 is a sport of selfish drivers who are there to all win championships. And yes, you have a teammate, but a lot of the times your teammate is your enemy number one. Like, it's the person that you need to perform against, the person that you need to earn your seat against, essentially. I mean, we're looking at this Perez and Max situation and like the differential between them. And I think, I think that was kind of running through Lando's head, was like, I'm in a championship race here, and yeah, they screwed up, but that's on them, and I want my points. And at the end of the day, I mean, you remember that race where Max was ordered to, like, Max already had the championship locked up. Max was ordered to let Checo through last year to secure a second place, or was that 2 years ago? I can't remember, but there was zero reason for Max not to let Checo through, and he was like, "No, don't ask me to do this. Like, I'm not going to do it. We're not talking about it again." And just like turned off his radio. And it's that situation where he's like, I'm here to win races. I don't give a shit if I already have the championship locked up, and I'm here to be dominant in every single race forever. And so, you get into a team order situation, and I think if you break that seal where you follow orders for the first time, you kind of like set yourself up as like, hey, let's win as a team, but I'm going to give up WDC potentially for this. And maybe some drivers just don't want to do that. That being said, I do think what you said about McLaren need to have a little heart to heart with each other is exactly what they need to do. They need to come to the table and say, hey, Lando's only X number of points behind Max. No matter what happens, we need to prioritize him winning races. It is what it is. Sorry about that. Or, if a driver is ahead on merit, They're going to earn that, and that's our priority. We're here to win some races. We think Red Bull's going to win no matter what, the championship, at least drivers. And we're here to win constructors, and we'll play it as it is. Or they need to come over the radio and be very clear. Lando, we're pitting to cover off Lewis, but you're probably going to undercut Oscar in that situation. You need to let him repass you. And after he repasses you, you're free to race. And just say these words and then let it go, because that's what they said. I think they were talking to Oscar. But they asked if they were free to race, and he was like, oh no, he was talking to Lando, and he asked if he was free to race, and they said yes, but only to lap 40. They were letting them race ahead of time before the pit stop. And if you're going to let them race previously, I don't see why they wouldn't let them race. Lando could have let him through earlier and potentially race, but they weren't being clear over the radio. And that, I made a note here. That's what Nico Rosberg's comment to Andre Sella was he was interviewing him, and instead of asking him a question, he started with a comment, and he just said, as a driver, my strong recommendation to you is to be very distinct and clear with team radio communications. Don't say at your leisure, when it's convenient for you, or can you please let Oscar through or whatever. Just say, do this. That's it. Just be very clear, because otherwise, if you give a driver any kind of ability to think for themselves, they're going to think selfishly. So, and I think Lando, ultimately lost that struggle internally to give Oscar, which I think deservedly so. But now there's a sour relationship a little bit. Oscar, he only did not like Lando's congratulations on Instagram. He liked everybody else's. So there's clearly a thing there. And, I don't know if you listened to the after radio message, but Oscar literally sounded depressed after winning his first race, which was so sad. I was expecting, woo, yeah. And he was like, thanks, guys. And I was like, oh my God, this is so awkward.
Yeah, he's a very subdued guy anyways, but that was definitely pretty telling. And I'm kind of on the fence about the whole thing, and I do think that Lando, again, it kind of comes down to that, you just need to have that attitude basically of an insane person of it doesn't matter, and you can tell me all you want that I need to give up this position, but I'm not going to give up the position. And if you go back and watch all these years of Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello, where Ferrari would straight up, Rubens would be winning by a lot, half a minute down the road, and they would be like, Rubens, sorry buddy, we're backing Michael, he's going to win the championship, you need to swap positions. And it wasn't even and it was sad because Rubens came close to winning championships and was a great driver, but there was they were just backing Michael the entire time, and it was races and races and years of that, and it didn't matter. They were like, this is our guy, and this is who we're he's been winning championships, so we're gonna back him kind of no matter what.
Right.
And so I think to some extent there needs to be that, it's nice to see other people win, but at the same time, you need that ruthlessness as a team, as a driver, if you want to win these championships. And look, I think this is the part where McLaren really needs to have that heart to heart, is yes, it's very clear that you guys are now super in the hunt for this constructors championship, but you also have a driver who's not 70 however many points Max is in the lead is a lot, but we're only halfway through the season, and you have a driver who's consistently second place, and arguably, given the team and the strategy, has had to give up 3 or potentially 4 other wins, and then you're really talking an actual very close race for the championship, because the Red Bull isn't as strong as it was, and honestly, if I felt bad for Piastri, but I would not have been surprised if Lando didn't give up the position. And there's a part of me that thinks he shouldn't have given up the position. And the other thing, to your point, is what I thought was weird was why he waited so long. Like if I was Lando and they were really asking me to give up the position, I think I would have said, okay, I'll give up the position, but if I'm faster than him, I'm going to pass him. Um, and so I was a little surprised that he didn't do that, like just give up the position much earlier and then end up passing him. But it's, it's obviously a really hard track to pass on, and I think you can't then as a team reverse the team orders and say like, hey, Lando's now faster than you, can you switch the positions back, because that's crummy. And Piastri led pretty much the entire race, so like I get it, but it's, the whole thing was very strange and mishandled.
Yeah, I mean, the last point I'll make on this is that I think the thing that made it the most strange at the end was that they kept asking Lando to let Oscar through, but Lando was gaining time on Oscar. And
Right.
it was like, how do I let a guy through who's not near me? I'm 4 seconds ahead, and 2 laps ago, I was 3 seconds ahead. I'm very clearly the faster driver. Now, that being said, because they told Oscar that they were going to let him through, because they did. They came over the radio and told Oscar, like, we're going to swap the positions. Oscar in that moment has no reason to hunt down Lando and or like burn up his tires trying to chase him down. So maybe he was conserving tires so that he could lead the race and be stronger with not burnt up tires or chewed up tires. And Lando was trying to, like, in the back of his head, make this like egotistical, look how fast I am. And he was burning up his tires. So I don't know if that's the case or not, but that was sort of the story I told myself. But it still makes it really awkward for the viewer to be like, why are they asking him to let him through when Lando's pulling away? So, like you said, he should have just let him through and said, hey, yeah, I'm going to let him through immediately. And then we're racing. And that's what it is. But the whole thing was mishandled. But speaking of needing to be a hothead and other hotheads on the track, we finally, or not finally, but we saw a Mr. Hothead come back in full force with Max this race. I this was even more mind blowing because it seems like everybody woke up on the wrong side of the bed. It seems like everyone was hungry or whatever it needed to be, and Max was fighting with GP the whole race and kind of being a butthead, and doing exactly what he told, like in Austria or whatever like that. He's like, "What are we just?" He's just trying to dive bomb to pass, and then he does the exact same thing to Lewis, and I ends up almost killing his car. I don't know how it stayed in one piece, but I'm curious what your thoughts on Max are, and the sort of the version of him we saw this race.
Max is the classic I can dish out a ton of shit but can't take shit
Hundred
at
percent,
all.
yeah.
And it was funny because like I really like. It took me a long time to like Max. I like him now because I think it's like fascinating how good of a driver is and how dominant he is. But it took me a long time because when he started, he was 17. He was like this idiot little kid who was just like hot-headed and panicky all the time, and he was great even when he first started. But he like had that attitude of, if it wasn't going my way, like, it's not my fault, it's everyone else's fault.
Right.
And I think it was like funny kind of to see that um, rise up again, and it's really interesting because the car isn't as good, or everyone's coming back, and so the races are much closer. And I think his weakness is how savage of a driver he is, and I think like eventually other drivers will learn to exploit his frustration, and he'll be the one that starts to make those mistakes. And it's always going to be tricky because, like, is it a racing incident? Is he like purposely screwing up? I think also Max is very, very good at like playing the rules game, where other drivers aren't so much. Like he'll like exploit every rule in the book, I think, until he gets a real reprimand. But yeah, I mean, he's a hothead, and it's not, him dominating anymore. But I also think that is what makes him a great driver. Like, all he wants to do is win
Yep.
and nothing else, and he will go to the ends of the earth to make that happen, including, sacrificing his car. Like, he'd rather him and his rival be out of the race than like be passed or be challenged.
Yeah, there's like over the last year and a half, this like new version of Max Verstappen that was like coming out. This He's been very nonchalant in the last few races, at least the beginning part of this year. Even when he hasn't made pole or even when he hasn't won, he's like, I'm not too bothered about it in interviews, and he's just always like, we'll see what happens. These kind of things happen in racing. He says a lot, and like after the crash with Lando, he basically came out and publicly said, like, I don't really care. Like, my friendship with Lando was more important. I want to preserve that first and foremost. We'll talk about it, and that's what matters to me. And he wasn't like incredibly just like, what the fuck, like, fuck Lando, fuck this guy. No, he wanted to preserve the friendship. And like, I think for a while, like, he was separating his mind from Formula One a little bit just because he hates the kind of spectacle that it's become, and he's there to be a racer, and that's what he cares about. But I think maybe the inner workings of Red Bull starting to pull apart a little bit, seeing the other teams catch up, the downfall of the development cycle of their car, and then just all the drama inside and whatever else is going on is just starting to get to him a little bit. And I saw that version of Max that I haven't seen in a while from the 2021 fight with Lewis, and it was really funny. But like, I was like, please don't become this dickhead over the like. I watched an interview with him where GP was like basically complaining about how Max treats him, and I was like, shit, don't be like an asshole. But we saw that come back. I rewatched that footage of the Lewis crash, and he instantly over the radio blames Lewis, and Lewis did nothing wrong there. I mean, Max locked up and was a passenger in his car, and they're in a turn. What does he want Lewis to do? Not turn and you just foresee the future that Max is going to lock up and also not turn. So, it's completely on Max there, and um, you know, giving the blame instantly to somebody else, and then in the future not retracting that blame and saying, "Oh, I saw the footage, nothing happened." He just keeps complaining about it. So, I think we're going to go back to full Mad Max trying to hunt down this title and make sure that he doesn't lose it. But I don't think that he's really under threat of losing it, because I think we're going to see a couple of Mercedes winners, a couple of McLaren winners, a couple of, Max coming back on the podium. And so unless Lando's like winning every race, I just don't think that they can make up that point deficit, mainly because it's never been done in Formula One. The whatever 84 points or whatever he was ahead before this race, it's never been overcome in the history of Formula One. So I guess it's theoretically possible, but Lando has like 3 or 4 races now that he should have won or could have won and didn't win. So I don't think his championship is at threat, but um, we'll see. I think it's going to be an interesting second half of the year, and definitely an interesting next year with uh, the car and the pecking order being so close. And I'm really curious what's going to happen with Lewis at Ferrari, by the way, because Mercedes is seems to be on the up and up. Somebody made a joke about with all this drama with Max and GP and Red Bull and everything, that like Toto was like landing his helicopter on Max's doorstep to finally get him, because he's like, yeah, let the hate flow through you.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think, it's easy, like, when you're so dominant. I think it's much easier to be nonchalant about that stuff, but I do think now he's seeing it, and maybe you're right. Like, maybe Lando, I think, will get close, but probably won't overtake him. But I do kind of think I do kind of think that they are gonna overtake Red Bull for the constructors. And
Absolutely.
I think that will piss off Max. And I think that Max kind of sees it all unraveling a little bit. And while he's dominant, he's not like 30 seconds in front of everyone dominant. And sometimes he has bad races, but most of the time he's winning. Like, this is 3 races in a row that he hasn't won. And it's shocking to even think that that is a shocking thing. But, you know, like his his attitude could get the best of him. You never know. He could have more races where he's getting fifth or like crashing and not finishing. And to your point, I think the trickiest part is there have been so many other winners, so it's not like Lando picking up the pieces every other time. Whereas with the 2021 championship, it was like if it wasn't Max, it was Lewis,
Right.
and if it wasn't Lewis, it was Max. So who knows if it will end up like that? But I mean, Lando has been on the podium so much. Um, it's entirely possible that this, like the rest of the season, could just be like a Lando or Max fest. In which case, you never know. Like you just never know. Crazy stuff has happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's still 76 points, which is a lot. And if they both end up on the podium consistently, there's just not enough point
Yeah,
differential there. I mean, there's going to have to be a couple races with Lando winning and Max crashing, or a lot more situations like this where Max gets P5. Wow, he got P5 like that. He threw that away. He had the podium. He had locked it up. All he had to do was, pass Lewis in a more conventional way, wait to the next lap or whatever, and he would have had that podium. But Lando's going to need as many of these days as possible to overcome the gap. Now, that being said, I think he will lock up P2 pretty easily, and that they will get past in the constructors. I mean, I think it's depending on their development and depending on if their consistency with George, and I think it's very possible that Mercedes could to catch and pass depending on their performance, as long as Perez keeps underperforming the way that he has. But curious on your thoughts on Mercedes, like from their performance this weekend. Obviously, Lewis won in Silverstone, and then he got a podium here, potentially undeserved because of Max. I mean, not undeserved, obviously deserved it, but potentially got it because of Max being a hothead. But do you think their performance is actually back, or do you think they're going to be kind of like picking up a couple of like podiums here and there, but mostly in the like fourth through seventh range for the rest of the year? Or do you think Mercedes is contention to win races going on?
I want them to be back so badly. I don't think they're quite there, and I don't know why they can't get a handle on the car. And it's possible that they're just so far behind in development. I mean, like they're obviously still doing well comparatively, but I think they may be so far behind in development that they just haven't had the time to like figure out the little nuances. Because they'll have a race and they look amazing and it seems like they're back, and then they'll have the next race and it's a total disaster. I also think a big part of it is like George Russell's good, but I think a big part of it is that Hamilton's driving style doesn't really suit this generation of cars, and that really sucks to see because it was the same thing with Vettel and it was the same thing when Schumacher came back. Um, the cars were just different and it didn't suit their driving styles, and so they just couldn't race in the same way that they were able to. So I think they'll be. I think they're definitely like podium contenders. I don't know that they're always going to be fighting for wins. I think they'll get wins when crazy stuff happens at the front with Lando and Max. But you have to be around to get those podiums, and we saw it with George Russell in Austria. Like you really just never know. And at a minimum, I think they're at a place where they're still fighting for podiums. Maybe not clear wins all the time on pace, but they are always there to pick up the pieces. And I think that's where Mercedes has always been super consistent, is like kind of no matter what, they're always like ready to pounce.
Right.
So we'll see. I don't know that it's as bad anymore as them being like, you know, top of Formula B or like even in the mid, back in the midfield, but um, we'll see what happens. Uh, I just don't think they're like consistent. I don't think they know how to work the car enough for every race. So it's interesting to see how they kind of ebb and flow.
That's one thing that I'm still getting used to and learning more and more about in Formula One, is that how dependent like the track are for a car and their development. I mean, obviously, Red Bull and other teams have been able to figure out kind of like a solid performance across the entire spectrum. But we saw 2 years ago or last year in Singapore, like how poor the Red Bull was in that race. It had literally won every other race, and they couldn't get even a podium in that Singapore race. The car was just awful. Depending on elevation or the material of the track, the degradation, everything like that. So I do think that Mercedes has those moments of being back, and I want to see them back too. Although I'm not really sure that I want George in a championship winning car when Lewis leaves the team. But that being said, it would be nice to see Lewis continuing to get back towards that eighth championship at some point, because obviously, he deserves that after what happened in 2021, and also, just the other close calls he has. I'd like to see Lewis get that. When he won in Silverstone, seeing his smile was amazing, and Lewis he's breaking records like left and right. He's the first driver to hit 200 podiums after this. So this is um, I like seeing championship level drivers being in championship level cars, and then let's leave it on the track. But yeah, let's talk about winners and losers for the week. So I think we both kind of obviously have this Piastri and Lando pairing as a kind of winners for the week. Any additional thoughts on those two guys?
No, I mean there's been a lot of talk of, I think McLaren as a team screwing up, not just this race, but the last few races when Lando really should have won. But I think at the end of the day, even though Lando didn't win this race, like great result for the team, obviously. And while I think he maybe should have won, I think they're both in my winners column just because it's a 1-2 for the team, and that's amazing, especially in this environment with Perez kind of shitting the bed at Red Bull. So they're catching up. They're catching up quickly. And I put Hamilton in there just because he got his 200th podium, and he seemed like, even at a track where he didn't qualify particularly well and he was having a lot of issues with the car, it was he again, like it's his consistency, and he can always seem to like pull the car a little further up than maybe where it should be.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I've always noticed about Hamilton. Like obviously he was struggling with the car a little bit, especially last year and the year before. And once the car started showing moments of brilliance again, you could see, like I could physically see when watching the race and how on rails the car can be sometime. I can see the difference between Hamilton and maybe some of the other drivers on the grid, how much more on the edge that he's taking it and just trusting the car, trusting the grip, and trusting like the car not to lose itself around a turn. And I see that with Max all the time. It's actually kind of astonishing how like casual like an onboard from Max will look, and he just kind of looks like he's just like putzing around the track when he's on the limit, and that's just because he trusts. He does so many laps, he does so many iterative changes to the car that he knows that limit and he trusts it. And I think Hamilton is able to do that, and I think that's the difference between maybe like a Max and a Perez, is that Perez will like back out when he doesn't fully trust the car because he's spun out so many times before. And so I think that's where the magic that Ham brings, and that's why he's able to sometimes get podiums that he doesn't necessarily deserve on the performance of the car. But totally agree with the Lando and Piastri thing. Total winners this weekend, good team result. And I just added a little note about this. I don't know if you saw, excuse me, saw the clip. And I apologize ahead of time if I get the ethnicity. Wow, I can't pronounce words. Ethnicity wrong. There was like an Indian guy who like bombarded Piastri or like went up to his car as he was approaching the track and like handed him a $5 bill. And Piastri's like, no, I don't want this. But he's like, no, take it. Because in the culture, it's good luck to give somebody money. And he handed him a $5 bill and said, you're gonna win. And then he won. So maybe this guy needs to give some more people some money. One of the McLaren guys came up to Oscar while he was in the hot tub after the race and gave him the money, and it's like you did it. He completely forgot about it, and he's like, "Oh shit, yeah, I won." They're probably going to frame that somewhere in the McLaren offices, but
give your Piastri more money, and he will win more.
Yeah, just pay the drivers, and they'll perform better.
Fixed it.
But losers for this week, I'm just gonna add McLaren. Like, not that they lost from a team perspective, was obviously a great result, and they have one of the best driver pairings on the grid, but they definitely over the last few races have shown some issues. And the F1 commentators, they said that before the race they were talking to the McLaren team and they admitted to it. They said, we sometimes look at the big picture, we look at the race as a whole and try to make decisions based on that instead of focusing on what's happening this lap. What can we do this lap? How can we best perform what is happening right now at this situation? And we don't think about that sometimes. And they said, we're trying to refocus as a team. And the whole time that they were making these poor decisions, they were like, they're doing the thing that they said right before this race that they said that they didn't want to do anymore. And they're still doing it. And it was like a huge conversation. So, and they've made these mistakes a few times. They've screwed Oscar over 2 or 3 times now this year on strategy when they didn't double stack him. And he lost so many places because of that when he actually had a possibility to win that race as well. What was that? Was that Silverstone?
Yeah, that was Silverstone.
Yeah, because the amount of time that he lost not being double stacked, and I already said this in the last podcast, but it was less than the time that he finished behind the leader in the race. So on paper, he would have won the race. Obviously, you never know what happens if things change, but it is what it is. So super good result from McLaren. Obviously, they have a great driver pairing, but they need to shore up their team workings. And then I just put Max. Like, Max threw away a podium. He very clearly has some issues with the team that he needs to work out. He's very likely going to win the championship. I don't know actually how much he cares about the constructors. Maybe he does. Maybe he only cares about himself and in getting the personal title. But I definitely think Max has some issues for the future he needs to work out if he wants to make sure that he wins the championship next year as well, because he's definitely going to have Piastri, Lando, potentially Lewis, depending on the Ferrari, but whoever else, maybe George could be in contention, or whoever else gets into that Mercedes seat. So we'll see what happens. But Max, calm down a little bit, get some sleep, don't play games until 3 a.m.
My super fan theory that I just made up right now, which I'm positive
it's 100% true,
1,000% is not true, is Max knows that he is not under threat for the drivers' championship, but they are under threat for the constructors' championship. So if he does get third, fourth, or fifth, it still gets him enough points to kind of stay ahead, but also does not do enough to keep them in the constructors' championship, because Perez is doing so poorly, and it's almost like a nod of like, fuck you guys,
yeah,
I'm gonna win the drivers' championship, and I'm gonna make sure that you don't win the constructors' championship. I'm sure that's not true, but that would be pretty funny. And if I was Max, maybe I would do that. I'm a little diabolical, so
I
who
love
knows?
it. Who else you have on your losers list?
I had I had Perez. I mean, that kid is in a rough spot, and I kind of feel bad for him because I can't imagine the rut that he's in, and just this downward spiral of not being able to trust himself and not being able to trust the car. And, if you're only getting negative feedback all of the time, and I think especially now when the consensus is like, you can't, like, this is not a sustainable situation. And as much as we like you and as much as your endorsement deals help us, like, we are throwing this away, like, now more than ever. um it's super important. And what I find strange is he didn't have to be pushing it that hard. Like, he only needed enough to get himself through, and I think he is good enough to do that in that car. But I think sometimes he just feels like he needs to push it a little bit more. And sure, maybe the car isn't really developed for his driving style necessarily, but I think, it's like when you and I are racing on the F1 game, and like we'll do these qualifying laps, and then we'll do a time that's good enough to like get us at the front or close, and then we'll just like fly around the track and just push it as fast as we can and see what happens. And sometimes we crash and sometimes we don't. But like having the patience to at least like set one solid time and not push it in a place, like especially in those types of conditions where it's like not even necessarily changeable, but like, it's wet offline and you're on slick tires, like you should be very careful.
Right.
And sometimes going the fastest isn't the fastest, and you need to make sure that you have the grip and that the car is gonna not slide out and all of that stuff. So I think like whatever rut he's in, I honestly don't think it matters a ton anymore, because I would be shocked if he's there after the summer break after this weekend. If he like magically does amazing in Spa, then maybe. But like, I think they just I think the real issue is that Red Bull, who's known for being a super savage team, doesn't know who they would put in that seat. And that's the only reason why he's there. And I think if, I don't know, even if he does well, like let's say he does well at Spa, he's still at this point not going to be in the top three even, right? Like you have two super fast McLarens, Mercedes is there, Verstappen is, when he is doing well and when he's got the car under him, he's like miles ahead of everyone. So you have three or four cars that are great right now. So it's not even like, he can really make up a ton of points at this point. And I think that the constructors is so close that if McLaren has another really good running, they will overtake Red Bull.
Yeah, they're 51 points shy of them right now. So
So maybe it's a little further than I thought, but
it's two or three races away from.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think I also put Daniel in there. This wasn't his fault at all. They had like some insane pit strategy for him.
Pit him on lap
Uh,
7.
yeah, and he was like fuming the entire time, which I get. And so I'm not gonna like sit here and give him a ton of grief for this race in particular, but he's not doing well against the benchmark, who is Yuki, and Yuki is too much of a hothead to be put in the Red Bull seat. I don't think they'd seriously consider him. And it doesn't really make sense for them to kind of like try him out for half a year. And I think really they just don't know who would go in that seat. If it were me, I would throw Liam Lawson in there just to be like, let's give it a shot and see what's up. But I know there's lots of politics, and especially around Daniel and all that stuff. But he really hasn't been proving himself. So who knows at this point? It's kind of a strange situation to have that many decent drivers, but no decent drivers.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult when there's like a good driver market and a lot of contracts ending for next year, but then you maybe want to make a swap mid-season. So like you can't put signs in mid-season if you want signs next year because he has a contract with Ferrari to finish out the year. So it's like, what if you're like, but I want signs, so that then you kind of like have to like let Checo ride him out and not put Liam in because you don't want to send the signal to signs that, hey, we're putting Liam in, we're trusting him, and then making him make a decision for another team. So it is a really tough situation. But I do think that it's weird that a ruthless team like Red Bull, who's kicked Gasly out midseason, kicked Albon out midseason, just like doesn't know what they're doing. And, they've put so much behind Max that this seat really hasn't mattered as long as it's performed. And Perez, got second in the championship last year. And so I'm assuming that they thought he would at least be on par with what he did, get some podiums, maybe win a race and always finish up at the front. But he's just kind of completely unraveled. And eventually, no matter, like you said, how much money he brings in, it will become embarrassing to the sport. And then if let's say there's this crazy world where Toto lures Max and Max has had it with the drama. Adrian's gone. He doesn't want the Christian, and his dad drama. Let's just say he jumps ship for some crazy reason. Then they have Perez and nobody. And Red Bull is all of a sudden nowhere. So they have to make a change, I think. Um, I have no idea. It was funny that you said that they wouldn't get Yuki a shot. I made a joke to my wife while we were watching it. I was like, wouldn't it be really funny if they put Yuki in the seat and it was just freaking nonstop back and forth, Max and Yuki yelling over the radio constantly? It was just like Yuki's like, stop, let me race, leave me alone. And then Max is like, what the hell are you doing? And like Red Bull's just like mute button, like shut these guys up. Yeah,
I kind of want that to happen now.
I don't like Yuki has had too much of a hot head for so long, and it took him 2 years to really calm it down. And then he calmed it down for like half a season, and now he's back to being pissed again. And maybe rightfully so about the whole Red Bull situation. But that this is top tier seat, and you have to be a top caliber driver. You either have to be a dick who is the best driver on the planet like Max, or you need to be like a solid driver who never makes mistakes and just consistently scores points. And right now they're lacking that with Perez. Obviously he's in my he was in your losers, he's in my hot seat. He's been in my hot seat for 3 weeks now. This guy, like you said, I don't think he's going to have that great of a week at Spa. And Spa's a track where people crash. So
and it rains.
And it rains
on some parts of the track.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is when they signed his contract, I was pretty surprised. But then what I realized is they probably signed his contract to see if they could get him mentally out of his rut. And I think they put those provisions in his contract where they sort of had a backup plan of like, if this doesn't get him out of his rut, then we can, like we have our out. My suspicion is that they will give him the boot mid-season. They'll put Ricardo in the seat for the rest of the year. They'll put Lawson in Ricardo's seat as like a test to see how he does against Yuki. And then they'll probably, unless Ricardo is like second in every race or like doing incredibly well, I would think that they would put Lawson in the car for next year and say goodbye to Daniel. And then I guess that opens up a seat for Lance Stroll.
Yeah, like
no, yeah, I don't know who else. I don't know who else they would put in there. I just like, unless Daniel did shift to Red Bull and like did impeccably well, I don't know that they would keep him on for another year.
I just
But I don't know.
I just don't like I just have a hard time personally with the whole Danny Rick situation going to Red Bull only because of what happened at McLaren and what has happened over, a little bit of time with VCarb is what happens if you take Checo out and you put Daniel in and he shits the bed just as hard as Sergio? It's going to look so bad. Like, at least if you put a new driver into that seat, like Liam, and he shits the bed, you're like, well, we didn't really know what he was capable of. But if you put Danny Rick in that seat and he does poorly, then they're going to be like, well, you saw that he did poorly in McLaren and he's not really doing insane things at VCarb. Like, what were you thinking? But again, they don't really have a good solution. So
That's why I think it could be a good send off, right? Like, even if he does terribly, then it's like, okay, you're too inconsistent. Like, I don't think he's a bad driver. I just think he's very inconsistent. Like, every time he does well, and then he's like, I'm back. Like, the next race, he does terribly. Um, so I think that's why it's sort of an easy and like almost a nice send off for him, because he'll probably do better than Perez. Um, it gets Lawson in Formula One. It gets him experience and back in a Formula One car at that team. Um, and then, I think ultimately at the end of the day, he probably won't be very consistent, and they can be like, we love you. We tried this. I think we got to like move on from this. And then move Lawson into that seat if he does well.
what's funny is that we know for a fact that when Sergio crashed, missing, Q1 exit again, like that Lawson was licking his chops, going like, "Oh yeah," but then I also believe fully and wholeheartedly that Carlos Sainz is thinking the same thing because there's no way in my mind that Carlos is waiting this long to make a decision without thinking that something is going to happen at Red Bull or something is going to happen at Mercedes where they're going to come back crawling to me and give me some sort of deal because I think I said this last podcast that you know he basically only has back markers available to him. So why not just wait? And who cares where he ends up if he can maybe wait it out and risk being at a top team? So it'll be interesting to see who actually does get that seat. Because it would be really bad for Carlos if it goes to Liam and or Daniel Ricciardo, because then Red Bull's going to want to see their performance for the rest of the year, which gives Carlos the forcing function of having to make a decision and either being at musical chairs and uh, potentially losing out for a seat altogether for next year, or hoping they also shit the bed and having a seat available at the end of the year. But it's going to be a really interesting silly season. We'll see what happens. I thought silly season was over because Lewis started it in like January, February. I can't remember when he announced it. We were like,
So
"What the
early
hell?"
on. I think it
And
was like May or something.
yeah, and there's all we kind of know Ocon's maybe going to Haas, and I'm still waiting to see Valtteri's future because I don't want him to leave, but we'll see what happens. But we kind of have an idea about where people are going or what's happening, and but there's still a lot of drama to happen over this next few weeks. But speaking of the next few weeks, we got Spa coming up. It's next week. I'm a little sad for the 3 or 4 weeks off after that, but Spa is a great race. It's always historic. It's always classic, and hopefully we don't do 2 laps behind a safety car in the rain. We get a good race, but I think if we don't, it'll be fantastic. I predicted Oscar was going to win this race. Kind of wishful thinking. And it didn't happen in the way I thought. But what are your predictions for Spa? It's kind of we've had 7 different winners, right? Something like that. And
Yeah, 7 different winners.
wow, it's
I
crazy.
th- I think I will be sad, but I think Max will come back with vengeance, like a lot. He was really good around Spa last year. It'll also be interesting. I think there was no further action on his
Yeah,
potential penalty. So that part won't matter. But I was hearing that he has to take engine penalties at some point. So if he had that, then he would just take the engine penalties and start from the pit lane. He maybe will do that this race anyways, just because he was so strong last year. But at the same time, like, it's not as easy as it was last year. Like, everyone's caught up, so it's not just going to be an easy, like, Max storms from the back of the field and just goes to the front, because a lot of people are faster. I think Lando could win the next race also. I think it'll either be Max or Lando. I think the McLarens will be super strong at this race. I think Mercedes will also be super strong. I want Ferrari to be strong only because I want them to be good next year when Lewis is there. But I think it'll be Mercedes ahead of Ferrari, then McLaren's, and then Verstappen in some way, shape, or form. I think it'll be 2 McLarens and a Verstappen on the podium.
Yeah, that was basically going to be my prediction as well. I definitely think Max is overdue. It was something like 900 something days, if I recall correctly, since he's missed three race wins in a row, or 3 weekends without a win, and it would be kind of mind boggling to have him go 4 without a win. So I think Max will be back on top, and we'll probably see some iteration of the papayas on the podium in either order is very likely to me. So yeah, I'm curious how, we obviously didn't get to some of the other teams, but I'm really curious how Ferrari kind of pans out the rest of the year. They looked really strong after Carlos lost his appendix, and just, and then Charles won Monaco. And it was like one of those things that you were like, holy shit, we're going to have so many potential fight for the championship. And then Ferrari just sort of seemed to go back a little bit in pace. And I think, that's because Mercedes made some good gains, and McLaren obviously is making great gains. So, but we'll see where they end up. I think it's going to be a good end of the year, good race in Spa. And hopefully when we come back, we'll have a lot more to talk about this driver market like we just discussed. So
it'll be an interesting summer break for sure.
Yep. Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, with some work schedules and conflicts and some business trips coming up, Cheyenne unfortunately couldn't make it today, but it's always a pleasure having you join the podcast, and thank you, and appreciate having you around as always, and getting me into the sport. So yeah.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
See ya after Spa, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Cheyenne and I would love for you to join the Fan Team Radio community. So please like, subscribe, or follow on your platform of choice, and we'll see you next time.